Last night I had a dream that I missed the draft. I thought I was back home. I was trying to get a ride up here to New York.
Leonard Kevin Bias, aka Len Bias, born November 18th, 1963, died June 19th, 1986. In just a few days, the basketball world will quietly reach a heartbreaking milestone. It will mark nearly 40 years since the death of Len Bias, a player who never appeared in a single NBA game, yet somehow left one of the biggest what-ifs in basketball history. 4 decades later, his name is still mentioned whenever fans debate the greatest talents whose careers never had the chance to begin. Because in the summer of 1986, the Boston Celtics believed they had just secured the future of their franchise. Larry Bird was still leading one of the greatest teams ever assembled, but Boston had somehow landed the second overall pick in the NBA draft. Waiting for them was an athletic marvel from Maryland who many scouts believe possessed superstar potential. Len Bias wasn't expected to simply fit into the Celtics championship culture, he was expected to eventually carry it. But just 2 days after hearing his name called on draft night, everything changed. Before he could play a single game in the league, Len Bias was gone. Nearly 40 years later, what happened that weekend is remembered as far more than a personal tragedy. Many believe it became one of the most consequential weekends in NBA history, changing the future of a dynasty and leaving basketball forever wondering what might have been. What happened? Let's talk about it. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth. Let's get it, man. Like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know who I should do next. Len Bias was a 6'8" forward from Landover, Maryland, whose combination of size, explosiveness, and scoring ability made him one of the most feared players in college basketball during the mid-80s. After joining the University of Maryland in 1982 under legendary head coach Lefty Driesell, Bias steadily developed into the centerpiece of the Terrapins program. By his junior and senior seasons, he had become one of the nation's premier talents, earning back-to-back ACC Player of the Year honors while regularly battling powerhouse programs like North Carolina and Duke. His matchups against Michael Jordan quickly became legendary stories in the making, with many believing Bias possessed the athleticism and confidence to compete with anyone in the country. During his 4-year collegiate career, he finished with 2,149 points, making him one of the greatest players in Maryland history. As the 1986 NBA draft approached, Bias was widely viewed as one of the safest and most exciting prospects available. Then, on draft night, something remarkable happened. Despite coming off a 67-win season and another trip to the NBA Finals, the Boston Celtics held the second overall pick thanks to a trade they had made years earlier. It felt almost unfair. The league's greatest dynasty had somehow landed the player many believed could eventually succeed Larry Bird and extend Boston's championship window for years to come. The celebration around the Celtics organization was immediate. They believed they had secured the future of the franchise. But what nobody could have imagined was that basketball history was about to change before Len Bias ever had the chance to suit up. Stunt number 1, he was supposed to save a dynasty. By the summer of 1986, the Boston Celtics weren't simply one of the NBA's best teams, they were the standard every franchise was chasing. Led by Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, and Dennis Johnson, Boston had just completed a 67-win regular season before advancing to yet another NBA Finals. Bird was widely considered the best player in the world, but there was one growing concern inside the organization. He was about to turn 30, the miles on his body were beginning to accumulate, and the Celtics knew their championship core wouldn't last forever. Like every dynasty before them, they needed a succession plan. Then, through one of the most fortunate trades in franchise history, the plan unexpectedly fell into their lap. Back in 1984, Boston had acquired Seattle Supersonics' first-round draft pick in exchange for veteran Gerald Henderson. 2 years later, that selection became the second overall pick in the 1986 draft. For a championship team already loaded with not just Hall of Fame talent, but one of the greatest players ever in the middle of his prime years, landing a prospect of Len Bias' caliber was unreal. Around the league, executives and analysts couldn't believe the rich had somehow gotten richer. Bias wasn't viewed as a long-term prospect, he was considered NBA ready from the moment he left Maryland. His elite athleticism, polished mid-range game, and ability to score against elite competition had many scouts projecting him as an immediate contributor with legitimate superstar potential. Some even believed his combination of power and explosiveness rivaled that of a young Michael Jordan or even better. While replacing Larry Bird was an impossible task, Bias wasn't expected to replace him overnight. He was expected to learn beside him, gradually assume a larger role, and eventually become the face of the next era of Celtics basketball. For Boston, everything had aligned perfectly. They could continue chasing championships with Larry Bird while preparing for life after him without suffering the painful rebuilding phase that most dynasties inevitably face. It was the kind of opportunity franchises wait decades to receive. The Celtics left that draft night believing they had accomplished both goals at once, securing another title contender for the present while protecting their future for years to come. Just 2 days later, that future disappeared before it ever had the chance to begin in the most tragic of ways. Stunt number 2, the weekend that changed NBA history. On June 17, 1986, Len Bias walked across the stage in New York City and shook Commissioner David Stern's hand after being selected second overall by the Boston Celtics. It was the moment he had spent his entire life working toward. The following day, he traveled to Boston, met with the organization, posed for photographs in Celtic green, completed promotional obligations, and returned to the University of Maryland to celebrate with friends. By every account, the future looked limitless. In the early morning hours of June 19th, that celebration took a tragic turn. After spending the night socializing in a campus dormitory, Bias suffered a seizure after using cocaine. Friends initially believed he was simply having a medical emergency, but his condition quickly became critical. Emergency responders rushed him to Leland Memorial Hospital. Despite their efforts, Len Bias was pronounced dead at just 22 years old. The news sent shockwaves through the sports world, to say the least. 2 days earlier, the Celtics believed they had drafted the next cornerstone of their franchise. Now they were planning a funeral instead of a rookie press conference. Players, coaches, executives, and fans struggled to process how someone with so much promise could be gone while right on the doorstep of their dream. The tragedy also reached far beyond basketball. Bias's death became one of the defining stories of America's growing cocaine epidemic during the 1980s. Although later reports indicated he was not known as an habitual drug user, the circumstances surrounding his death ignited a national conversation about drug abuse. His passing was repeatedly referenced by politicians and public health campaigns, and Congress would later pass the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, legislation that became closely associated with his case and dramatically increased federal penalties for drug-related offenses. For the Celtics, however, the consequences were impossible to measure. They hadn't just lost a draft pick, they had lost a player they believed would bridge the gap between championship and the next era. The emotional impact lingered throughout the organization as teammates and coaches were forced to begin a new season carrying the weight of a future they had already started imagining, only to see it disappear overnight. And while nobody can say for certain what Len Bias would have become, there's little doubt that what happened over those 48 hours permanently altered the future of one of the NBA's greatest franchises. Stunt number 3, the future we'll never know. Nearly 40 years later, the hardest part about Len Bias' story isn't remembering how it ended. It's trying to imagine how different basketball history may have unfolded if it hadn't happened. And that's what still makes this story so fascinating to me. There's very few players whose career inspired this much questions before they ever played a single NBA game. Would Len Bias have become a Hall of Famer? Nobody knows. Would he have lived up to the enormous expectations? Again, nobody knows. But what we do know is that the Celtics believed enough in him to make him the centerpiece of their future, and that's what makes this story so difficult to process for so many years later. Larry Bird continued playing at an elite level, but the wear and tear on his body eventually caught up to him. Chronic back problems shortened his final years of his career, and Boston slowly began slipping from championship contention. Just a few years later, another devastating tragedy struck when Reggie Lewis, the player many hoped would lead the franchise into the next era, died suddenly in 1993. In the span of just 7 years, the Celtics lost 2 young stars they believed could define the future of the organization. As a basketball fan, it's impossible not to wonder what those teams could have looked like if even one of them had been there. Imagine a veteran Larry Bird mentoring Len Bias as he entered his prime. Imagine Boston extending its championship window into the 1990s instead of beginning a long decline. Maybe the Celtics still fall short. Maybe Michael Jordan and the Bulls become a dynasty anyway. We'll never know. And that's exactly what makes the conversation so compelling. The truth is, nobody can honestly say Len Bias would have become one of the greatest players who ever lived. That's unfair to him and impossible to prove, but it's equally impossible to ignore what some of the game's most respected coaches, scouts, and executives believe they had just witnessed. They saw a player with rare athletic gifts, undeniable confidence, and the talent to become one of basketball's next great stars. We'll never know if those projections would have become reality, but what we do know is that one weekend robbed basketball of the chance to ever find out. And nearly 4 decades later, that's still one of the saddest what-ifs the NBA has ever known. All in all, I couldn't imagine what that time must have felt like back then, losing such an important player at literally the worst possible moment in a basketball player's life, right after he'd been drafted into the NBA. Imagine if something like that happened to one of this year's top prospects. Matter of fact, don't imagine that, because it's too tragic to even put into the universe. That's how devastating this story still feels nearly 40 years later. What makes Len Bias' story so unforgettable isn't just the tragedy itself, it's the fact that there was never a chance to see how great he could have become. There's no NBA highlights, no All-Star appearances, no playoff runs, only the opinions of coaches, scouts, teammates, and opponents who were convinced basketball had just found its next superstar. Whether those expectations would have become reality is something none of us will ever know, but maybe that's why his name has never disappeared. Every generation has its biggest what if, and for many basketball fans, Len Bias will always be that player, not because of how his story ended, but because it ended before it truly began. 40 years later, we're still asking the same question the basketball world asked in June of 1986. What if Len Bias had gotten a chance to play? And sadly, that's a question that will never have an answer. Salute, much respect. Rest in peace to Len Bias. It's your boy JC Stunted Growth, and I'm out.
I think that I've been really blessed by the Lord. I just thank him for all the talents that I had.